My husband texted me, "Stuck at work. Happy Valentine's." At that exact moment, I was sitting 2 tables behind him in a steakhouse in Oak Brook, watching him kiss another woman like I'd never existed. And just as I stood up to walk over there, a stranger reached out, stopped me, and whispered, "Stay calm. The real show is about to begin." Valentine's Day fell on a Thursday that year. Cold enough that the wind off the parking lot stung your face, but not cold enough to keep people home. The restaurants around Oak Brook Mall were packed with couples carrying roses and those glossy red gift bags. Tom had texted me around 5. "Running late tonight. Supplier issue. Don't wait up. Happy Valentine's." 18 years of marriage, and that was the message. I stared at the screen for a long time in my kitchen in Naperville, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Lacey, Tom's daughter, the girl I'd helped raise since she was 9, had moved out 2 years earlier. The house had felt bigger ever since. I wasn't surprised Tom canceled dinner. Work had been his favorite excuse lately. Still, something about that text bothered me. Maybe it was the way he added Happy Valentine's like an afterthought. So instead of reheating leftover soup and watching television, I grabbed my coat and drove out to Oak Brook. There's a steakhouse there, Gibson's, the kind of place people go for anniversaries, business deals, or apologies that cost at least $200. The parking lot was nearly full. Inside, the restaurant smelled like grilled steak butter and expensive perfume. Low lighting, dark wood, quiet jazz drifting through the room. Couples leaned close across candlelit tables. I told the hostess it was just me. She gave me a sympathetic little smile and sat me near the back by the bar. At first, I didn't even notice him. I was studying the menu when I heard a laugh across the room. Tom had a very specific laugh, a short one, almost like a cough. I looked up. 2 tables ahead of me in a corner booth, Tom. He was leaning toward a woman I'd never seen before. She had a neat blonde bob and a red wool coat draped over the booth beside her. Early 50s, maybe. Confident posture. The kind of woman who looked comfortable in expensive places. My brain tried to explain it away. Maybe a client. Maybe a coworker. Then Tom reached across the table and touched her hand. Not casually. The way a man touches someone he already knows very well. I felt something cold slide down my spine. The waiter arrived at my table. "Can I start you with a drink?" "Just water," I said. I wasn't really watching them at first, not directly. Just quick glances over the edge of the menu. Tom leaned closer. The woman said something that made him grin. Then she touched his cheek. And then they kissed. Not a polite peck. A slow, familiar kiss. For a moment, I couldn't move. The restaurant noise faded. Forks against plates, glasses, clinking conversations around me, it all sounded far away. 18 years. 18 years of mortgage payments, road trips, school meetings, late-night conversations about retirement. And here he was, kissing someone else on Valentine's Day. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped softly against the floor. I wasn't thinking clearly, I just knew I needed to walk over there. Needed to stand in front of him and see his face when he realized I'd seen everything. I had taken maybe 2 steps toward their table when a hand caught my wrist. Not hard, just firm enough to stop me. I turned startled. A man sat at the table beside mine, early 60s, gray hair, tired eyes. He wore a navy sweater and had a half-finished glass of bourbon in front of him. He nodded toward Tom's booth. "Stay calm," he said quietly. I pulled my arm back. "Excuse me." "If you walk over there right now," he said, "they'll lie better." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He sighed and rubbed his forehead like a man who hadn't slept much lately. "Because that," he said, nodding toward the booth again, "is my wife." I blinked. "What?" "The woman in the red coat," he said. "Marianne." For a second, I thought he might be joking or confused. Then he held out his hand. "Greg Holloway," he said, "Downers Grove." I shook it automatically. "Dana Mercer." Greg looked back toward the booth. Tom and Marianne were talking again, leaning close like two people in their own private world. "I've been sitting here about 20 minutes," Greg said. "Figured tonight I'd finally see if my suspicions were right." And I asked. He gave a tired little smile. "Well," he said, "I guess we both got our answer." I sank slowly back into my chair. My legs felt weak. Greg watched them carefully. "Don't make a scene," he said. "Not yet." "I wasn't planning to throw a drink at him," I muttered. "Good," Greg said, "because that would actually make this easier for them." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, Greg pointed subtly toward their table. "Watch." Tom reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out an envelope. Not a small one. A thick letter-sized envelope. He slid it across the table. Marianne took it, opened it just slightly, then nodded. A moment later, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. She handed it to Tom. They spoke quietly. Tom glanced around the room once quickly. Then he slipped the folder inside his jacket. My stomach tightened. That didn't look like flirting. That looked like business. Greg leaned closer so no one else could hear. "I've been following her for a week," he said. "You hired a private investigator?" I asked. He nodded. "Found out she's been meeting someone, same guy, different places." I looked toward Tom again, toward the man who'd texted me Happy Valentine's 2 hours earlier. "What kind of places?" I asked quietly. Greg hesitated. Then he said, "Law offices." The words landed like a stone in my chest. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Across the room, Tom signaled the waiter for the check. Marianne touched his hand again. Another quick kiss. Greg exhaled slowly. Then he said something that made the back of my neck prickle. "If I'm right," he murmured, "your husband isn't just cheating?" I turned toward him. "What do you mean?" Greg looked straight at me. And in a calm, almost apologetic voice, he said, "He's planning something." He glanced back toward Tom and Marianne as they stood from the booth. Then he added quietly, "And whatever it is, it involves you." The cold air hit my face the moment I stepped outside. Oak Brook in February has that sharp, dry wind that cuts right through your coat. I stood near the entrance of the restaurant for a second, trying to slow my breathing. Inside, couples were still laughing and clinking glasses. Out here, the parking lot lights buzz softly above rows of expensive cars. Greg came out a minute later. Tom and the woman Marianne had already left through the side exit. Greg walked over beside me and shoved his hands in his pockets. "Well," he said quietly, "that went about as badly as expected." I let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I still can't believe that just happened." "Yeah," he said. "Took me a while to get used to it, too." For a moment, we both just stood there watching cars move through the lot. Then Greg pulled out his phone. "Look," he said. He turned the screen toward me. There were photos. Not many, but enough. One showed Tom and Marianne walking out of a hotel lobby in Schaumburg. Another showed them sitting at a small cafe patio somewhere, probably Naperville or Lille. Dates were visible on the corner of each photo. 2 months ago. 3 weeks ago. Last Thursday. My throat tightened. "How long have you known?" I asked. Suspected Greg shrugged. "Couple months. Known for sure about 4 days." I looked back toward the side of the building where Tom's car had been parked. "Why tonight?" Greg rubbed the back of his neck. "Private investigator said this dinner looked important." "Important how?" He swiped to another photo. This one made my stomach drop. Tom and Marianne walking into a small brick office building. Above the door was a sign, "Anderson and Pike, Family Law." I stared at it. "You think they're planning a divorce?" Greg shook his head slowly. "Maybe. But that's not the part that worried me." "What do you mean?" He zoomed in on the photo. Tom was carrying a folder. The same folder Marianne had handed him tonight. Greg slipped the phone back into his pocket. I've been married 33 years, he said quietly. You start to recognize patterns. What patterns? The kind where people don't just cheat, he said. They plan their exit. I crossed my arms, trying to warm my hands. Tom had been distant lately, working late more often, spending more time on his phone. But planning something? I wasn't ready to believe that yet. Greg leaned against a concrete pillar near the entrance. Let me ask you something, he said. Has your husband been asking weird questions about money? The question hit harder than I expected. I hesitated. Why? Greg didn't answer right away. He just watched my face. That was enough. I sighed. A few things I admitted. He asked about refinancing the house last month. Greg nodded. Anything else? I thought back. 2 weeks earlier, Tom had asked about the account where I'd placed the inheritance my mother left me. Not aggressively, just casually. Still, it had felt strange. He asked if the inheritance money was still in savings. I said slowly. Greg let out a quiet whistle. Yeah, he said, that tracks. What does that mean? He looked toward the parking lot again before answering. Means your husband might not just be having an affair. The wind lifted a few strands of my hair. What are you saying? I asked. Greg's voice stayed calm. I'm saying people about our age don't usually blow up their lives without a reason. He paused. Sometimes that reason is money. Tom came home around 10:15 that night. I heard the garage door open while I was sitting on the couch with the television on, though I couldn't have told you what show was playing. My heart started pounding again. The back door opened. Tom walked in carrying a small white pharmacy bag. Hey, he said casually, you're still up. I looked at him. The same face I'd known for 18 years. The same man I'd watched kiss another woman 2 hours earlier. Yeah, I said, couldn't sleep. He set the bag on the kitchen counter and loosened his tie. Tonight was a mess, he said. Supplier out of Milwaukee screwed up an order. I had to deal with it. He moved around the kitchen like everything was normal. Opened the refrigerator. Grabbed a bottle of water. Did you eat? He asked. Yeah. Another lie. Tom took a drink and sighed dramatically. God, I hate days like this. I watched him carefully. There was no nervousness in his voice. No hesitation. Just the same easy tone he'd used for years. Which meant one thing. He had absolutely no idea I knew. Sorry about dinner, he added, almost as an afterthought. Then he nudged the pharmacy bag toward me. Picked something up for you? I walked over slowly and opened it. Inside was a cheap Valentine's card and a small box of chocolate-covered caramels. Generic brand. Probably grabbed off a checkout counter. For a second, I almost laughed. 18 years of marriage. And the man couldn't even lie with Godiva. Thanks, I said. Tom kissed my cheek lightly. I'm exhausted, he said, going to take a shower. He headed down the hallway toward the bedroom. The moment the bathroom door closed, I gripped the edge of the counter. My hands were shaking. Not from sadness. From the effort of keeping quiet. 10 minutes later, I stepped outside onto the back patio and called Greg. He answered on the second ring. You okay? He asked. Define okay. Greg chuckled softly. Fair. We were both quiet for a moment. Then I said he came home like nothing happened. That's usually how this works. I leaned against the railing. Greg, what exactly do you think they're planning? He hesitated. Then he said, I think your husband is setting up a very clean exit. Clean how? Clean enough that everyone thinks the divorce was your fault? My stomach tightened. What makes you think that? Greg exhaled slowly. Because I've seen something like this before. Where? With my brother, he said. His wife convinced everyone he was unstable before she left him. I rubbed my forehead. Tom had recently mentioned to Lacey that I seemed forgetful. At the time, I thought he was joking. Now I wasn't so sure. Greg's voice pulled me back. There's one more thing he said. What? I asked the investigator to pull email records connected to Marianne's business account. And Greg lowered his voice. What he found wasn't great. My pulse jumped. What did it say? Greg paused. Then he read one line slowly. Dana's been under a lot of stress lately. She forgets things sometimes. I'm worried she might need help managing finances soon. The words felt like ice sliding through my chest. That wasn't just cheating. That was a story being built. A story where I looked unstable. I stared out into the dark backyard. Finally, I said quietly, "So he's not just planning to leave me." Greg didn't answer right away. Then he said the sentence that made everything suddenly clear. "No," he said. "I think he's planning to take your money too." I didn't sleep much that night. Tom fell asleep almost immediately after his shower, snoring softly beside me like nothing in the world had changed. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Every minute felt louder. By 6 in the morning, I gave up on sleep completely. Tom got up around 7, shaved, dressed, and grabbed a quick cup of coffee. "Long day today," he said, buttoning his shirt. "Meeting in Aurora." I nodded. "Drive safe." He kissed my forehead like he had 1,000 times before. Then he left. The garage door rumbled shut, and the moment his car pulled out of the driveway, something in my chest shifted. Not calm exactly, but clarity. I walked straight into the small home office Tom and I shared. The room smelled faintly like printer ink and dust. Sunlight came through the blinds in thin stripes across the desk. For years, I had handled most of the household paperwork, taxes, bills, insurance. Tom hated that kind of thing. Said numbers made his head hurt. Which meant if he was planning something financial, he probably assumed I wouldn't notice until it was too late. I opened the file cabinet. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out the tax folders. I felt ridiculous at first, like I was sneaking around in my own house. But Greg's voice kept replaying in my head. He's planning something. I started with the obvious things. Bank statements. Credit cards? Mortgage records. At first, everything looked normal. Then I found the first crack. A credit card I didn't recognize. Same bank as our joint card, but a different account number. I pulled the statement. Hotel charges. Restaurant tabs. A jewelry store in Oak Brook. The dates stretched back almost 3 months. I sat down slowly in the desk chair. 3 months. I kept digging. More statements. A consultation fee from something called Anderson and Pike, family law. The same office Greg had shown me in the photo. My chest tightened. I flipped through another folder. Inside was a printed document that made my stomach drop. It was a draft financial summary. Divorce planning paperwork. My name at the top. Tom's name underneath. And one line that jumped out immediately. Projected relocation of spouse within 60 to 90 days. Relocation of spouse, meaning me. I leaned back in the chair. For a moment, the room felt too quiet, too still. Then another memory surfaced. 2 weeks earlier, Tom had asked me something while we were cleaning up after dinner. "Is the inheritance still in that savings account?" he'd said casually. My mother had passed away 3 years ago. The money she left me wasn't enormous, but it wasn't small either, enough to matter. Technically, it was mine alone. Separate property, unless it got mixed with marital accounts, unless someone convinced me to move it. Suddenly, the pieces started fitting together. Tom hadn't just been cheating. He'd been positioning things. Slowly, carefully. So when he walked away, he could take more than half. I sat there for a long time staring at that document. Anger came first, hot and sharp. Then something steadier replaced it. Focus. I pulled out my phone and searched for the name on the law office again. Anderson and Pike. But that wasn't the number I needed. Instead, I called someone Greg had mentioned the night before. Eileen Vargas, divorce attorney. Wheaton. Her receptionist answered and transferred me after I explained it was urgent. Eileen's voice was calm and direct. "How can I help you?" I took a breath. "My husband is having an affair," I said, And I think he's preparing for a divorce I don't know about yet." She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the most practical question possible. "What evidence do you have?" I glanced down at the stack of papers on the desk. More than I expected. "Good," she said. "We set an appointment for that afternoon." Eileen Vargas had an office above a small insurance agency in Wheaton. Nothing fancy, just beige walls, framed certificates, and a large oak desk covered with neatly organized files. She was in her early 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. I handed her the documents. She read quietly for several minutes. Finally, she leaned back. "Well, she said your husband's been busy. You think this is serious?" Eileen raised one eyebrow. "He's already consulted a lawyer," she said. "That usually means the wheels are moving." I felt my throat tighten. "He's been telling people I'm forgetful," I added quietly, "like I can't handle finances." Eileen nodded slowly. "That's called laying groundwork." "For what?" "For making you look unreliable," she said, "if the divorce turns hostile." I rubbed my hands together nervously. "What do I do?" Eileen folded her hands. "First, you do not confront him." That surprised me. "Why not?" "Because the moment he knows you're aware of the plan, he'll move faster." She pointed to the inheritance document. "And if he's targeting this money, timing matters." I swallowed. "So what should I do?" Eileen's voice stayed calm. "You document everything. Copies of bank records, credit statements, emails, anything financial." Then she added something that made me feel slightly better. "Also open a separate bank account in your name. Move your income there." Quietly. I hesitated. "This feels sneaky." Eileen gave a small smile. "No," she said. "Sneaky is what he did. This is just paperwork." Over the next 3 days, I became someone Tom would never have recognized. I copied documents, saved digital records, opened a new checking account at the credit union my friend Sharon managed. Sharon didn't ask many questions, just raised her eyebrows when I explained. "Honey," she said gently, "you're doing the right thing." There was one close call. On Wednesday afternoon, I was photographing bank statements with my phone when Tom called unexpectedly. "Hey," he said, "quick question." My stomach flipped. "Sure. Did you ever move that inheritance money like we talked about?" For a split second, I almost answered honestly, but something stopped me. "No," I said, "I forgot." Tom chuckled lightly. "Well, maybe we'll handle that this weekend." Maybe. When the call ended, my hands shook so badly I had to sit down. That night, Greg called again. "I've got news," he said. "Good or bad? Depends how you look at it." I waited. "The investigator followed them again today," Greg continued. "Turns out they're planning a party." "A party?" "Yeah," he said. "Private banquet room in Lombard this Saturday." "For what?" Greg's voice turned grim. "An engagement celebration." The words hit me like cold water. Engagement. Apparently, Greg said, "Your husband thinks you'll be out of the picture by then." I stared at the wall in front of me. An engagement party. Tom introducing Marianne to friends. Like our marriage was already over. Greg spoke again. "You want to know the funny part?" "What?" "They're inviting people who know you." For a moment, I said nothing. Then something inside me settled. A quiet decision. "Good," I said. Greg paused. "Good." "Yes." "Why?" I looked down at the stack of evidence on my kitchen table. Then I said calmly, "Because that's exactly where we're going to finish this." By Saturday evening, the snow had started falling again. Not a storm. Just that slow, steady Midwest snowfall that makes the streets look quiet and almost peaceful. The kind of night where people bundle up, go to a party, and assume everything in the world is normal. The banquet hall sat above a small Italian restaurant in Lombard, tucked between a nail salon and a travel agency. I had driven past it a dozen times over the years and never thought much about it. Tonight, the parking lot was full. I sat in my car for a moment before going inside. My hands were steady, which surprised me. All week, I had imagined this moment. Different versions of it, some where I screamed, some where I cried. But now that it was actually here, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Simple outfit, navy slacks, cream blouse, camel coat. Nothing dramatic. Just the way I usually dressed. Because this wasn't theater. This was the end of something. And the beginning of something else? I stepped out into the cold and walked inside. Upstairs, the banquet room smelled like pasta sauce and cheap perfume. The place had those fake crystal chandeliers that tried a little too hard to look fancy. Music played quietly from a speaker near the bar. About 30 people were already there. Coworkers, a few church friends, some neighbors, people who had known Tom and me for years. And at the center of the room, standing near a table decorated with red flowers, was Tom. Next to him stood Marianne. She was wearing a dark green dress tonight, her hair styled carefully. She looked like someone expecting a very good evening. Tom was laughing with two men from his company. Then he saw me. I watched the color drain from his face. It happened instantly, like someone had turned off a light behind his eyes. "Dana," he said. A few heads turned. The room quieted just slightly. Tom walked toward me quickly. "What are you doing here?" he asked in a low voice. I smiled politely. "Hello, Tom?" He glanced around nervously. "You weren't invited." "No," I said. I figured that out. Marianne was staring at us now. "Tom," she said cautiously, "what's going on?" Tom rubbed the back of his neck. "Dana, maybe we should talk somewhere private." I looked around the room, at people holding glasses of wine, at the decorations that were clearly meant for a celebration. "No," I said calmly. "Actually, I think we should talk right here." Before Tom could answer, a woman across the room tapped a glass with a spoon. Marianne's sister, I assumed. "Everyone," she said cheerfully. "Can we get your attention for a moment?" People started turning toward her. Tom leaned closer to me urgently. "Dana, whatever this is, don't—" But I had already stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said. The woman with the glass paused. "Yes." I smiled politely. "Would it be all right if I said something first?" She looked confused. "Well, I suppose so." Someone handed me the microphone. The room grew quiet. 30 faces looking at me. Tom looked like he might faint. I took a slow breath. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Dana Mercer." A murmur rippled through the room. Some people clearly recognized the name. "I'm Tom's wife," I continued. The word wife hung in the air like a dropped plate. Tom stepped forward. "Dana, stop." But I kept going. "Earlier this week, my husband sent me a text message," I said. I pulled my phone from my purse. It said, "Stuck at work, happy Valentine's." A few people exchanged glances. I believed him, I said, until I walked into a restaurant in Oak Brook and saw him kissing another woman. Now the room was completely silent. Tom looked like a man who had just been pushed off a cliff. "That woman," I said gently, "is standing right here tonight." I turned toward Marianne. She looked stunned. "Tom told me his marriage was already over," she said quickly. "I'm sure he did," I replied. Then I set a folder on the table beside me. "And if this were only about an affair, I said I would have handled it privately." I opened the folder. But it isn't. I held up a sheet of paper. A credit card statement showing hotel charges. Another paper. A consultation with a divorce attorney. Then another. And a financial draft assuming I'd be relocating from my own home. Gasps spread through the room. Tom tried to grab the microphone. "Dana, this is ridiculous." "Wait," I said calmly. "There's one more thing." At the back of the room, Greg stood up. He had been leaning quietly against the wall near the bar. "Hello," he said. "My name is Greg Holloway." He nodded toward Marianne. "And I'm still married to her?" That caused a louder reaction. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Marianne turned toward Tom. You told me you were separated. Tom looked trapped. Marianne the first. But she had already stepped away from him. I placed a final envelope on the table. This, I said to Tom, is a copy of everything I've collected. Bank records, emails, legal notes. I've also sent the same documents to my attorney. Tom's voice cracked. You're humiliating me. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. From the speaker system near the bar, music suddenly started playing. The DJ, who clearly had no idea what had just happened, had accidentally hit the wrong track. Let's Stay Together by Al Green drifted into the room. For a moment, nobody moved. Then someone rushed over to turn it off. A few people began arguing. Tom's boss stood across the room with his arms folded, looking furious. Marianne's sister was demanding explanations. Marianne herself looked at Tom like she had never seen him before. The room had turned into chaos. I stepped away from the microphone and walked toward the door. No one tried to stop me. By the time I reached the parking lot, snow had started falling again. I stood there for a moment in the quiet. Then I took a deep breath. For the first time all week, I felt calm. The first message from Tom came the next morning. I didn't read it right away. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Naperville with a cup of tea, watching snow melt slowly off the backyard fence. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been for a long time. Not empty, just peaceful. My phone buzzed again, then again. Finally, I picked it up. Tom Dana, please call me. A minute later, this got out of control. Then another, we need to talk. I set the phone back down without answering. 18 years of marriage teaches you something important. You learn the difference between a conversation and an excuse. Tom didn't come home that night, or the next one. On Monday, he sent another message. I'm staying at a place in Elmhurst for a while. I imagined the kind of apartment he meant. Temporary furniture, neutral walls, takeout containers on the counter. Not the life he had pictured on Saturday night. Apparently, Marianne hadn't stayed with him either. Greg called me Sunday afternoon. Well, he said that relationship didn't survive the weekend. What happened? Greg chuckled softly. Turns out Tom wasn't exactly honest about his finances. What a surprise. Yeah, Greg said. Marianne thought he had a lot more money available. I leaned back in my chair. And when she realized he didn't, she realized she'd blown up her marriage for a man with a rented apartment. We both went quiet for a moment. It wasn't funny exactly, but there was a certain grim irony to it. The harder conversation came 2 weeks later. Lacey showed up at my door on a Sunday afternoon. She stood on the porch in a gray coat, arms folded tightly across her chest. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, why did you do that? Her voice wasn't angry exactly, more confused. Honey, I said gently, come inside. She stepped into the kitchen and sat down at the table. I mean it, she said. Why would you embarrass Dad like that in front of everyone? The question stung, not because it was unfair, but because it was predictable. I sat across from her. Your dad didn't tell you what happened. He said, you blew up at some party, she said, that you've been under a lot of stress. There it was. The story Tom had been building. I stood up and walked into the office. When I came back, I set a small stack of papers on the table. What's this? Lacey asked. Just look. She began flipping through them. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, emails, the financial planning draft. The room stayed quiet while she read. At one point, her eyebrows pulled together. Then she turned to the email Greg had shown me, the one where Tom wrote that I'd been forgetful, that I might need help managing money. Lacey sat back slowly. He told me you were struggling, she said quietly. I know. She stared down at the papers again. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Finally, she looked up. I thought you were just being dramatic. That would have been easier, I said softly. Lacey rubbed her forehead. Dad said the marriage was already over. I shrugged slightly. That was news to me. Silence stretched between us again. Then Lacey said something that surprised me. You know what the worst part is? What? He kept saying you were the strong one, she said. Her voice softened. Now I think he was right. It wasn't a full apology, but it was enough. Spring arrived slowly that year. Snow melted. The trees along the streets in Naperville started turning green again. Life didn't magically become perfect. Divorces never do. There were meetings with lawyers, documents to sign, conversations that felt longer than they needed to be. But one thing became clear very quickly. Tom's plan hadn't worked. Eileen's preparation had closed every door he expected to walk through. The inheritance money stayed protected. The house stayed mine for now. And the story he had tried to build about me being unstable collapsed the moment people saw the evidence. The truth is stubborn that way. A few months later, I took a drive up toward Lake Michigan. Just me. No schedule. No explanations. I parked near the water and sat on a bench watching the waves roll in slowly. At 52, starting over sounded terrifying when I first thought about it. But sitting there that afternoon, I realized something. The fear had mostly been about losing a life I thought was secure. Once that illusion disappeared, things looked different. Quieter. Simpler. More honest. Tom thought the cruelest thing he could do was replace me without warning. But the truth is, the cruelest thing would have been letting him succeed. If you've ever had to hold on to your dignity while your heart was breaking, then you probably understand exactly what that feels like. And if this story meant something to you, thank you for listening. Feel free to share your thoughts or experiences. You're not alone in this.